It was a rainy evening in upstate New York. The streets glistened with the recent downpour and the wind howled through the trees. A young couple, Emily and Jack, drove up a narrow, winding road, searching for the house they had just rented online. The advertisement promised a cozy getaway in a historic mansion, but the photographs seemed slightly off. The house stood at the end of the road, looming like a silent sentinel. Its Victorian architecture was majestic yet intimidating. Broken shutters rattled in the wind and the front door hung slightly ajar, creaking whenever the breeze caught it. Jack turned to Emily. "This place looks a bit more authentic than the pictures," he said, trying to laugh. Emily shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. "Authentic, Jack, it looks haunted," Jack chuckled. "Haunted? Come on, it's just an old house. Let's see the inside." As they stepped in, a musty smell hit them. Wet wood and something else, something metallic, faintly iron-like. The door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. "Did you hear that?" Emily whispered, eyes wide. "Probably just the wind," Jack replied, though his voice lacked conviction. The interior was a maze of narrow hallways, creaking stairs, and dusty furniture. They found the bedrooms on the second floor and set down their bags. Outside, the rain continued to lash against the windows, making shadows dance across the walls. Emily unpacked her things, noticing strange markings etched faintly into the wooden beams. They looked like old symbols, partially obscured by dust and time. "Jack, look at this," she said, pointing. He leaned closer, squinting. "Looks like some sort of old writing. Maybe from the previous owner." As night fell, the house seemed to come alive. Whispering voices floated through the hallways, soft, almost like someone talking just beyond the edge of hearing. At first, they dismissed it as the wind through the broken shutters, but then footsteps began echoing in the hallway above them. "Jack, someone's up there," Emily whispered, gripping his arm. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly ascended the stairs. The footsteps stopped the moment he reached the top. Silence returned. The house seemed to breathe around them. The next morning, they explored the basement. The air was damp and cobwebs clung to every corner. Jack found an old diary hidden behind a loose brick. The cover was leather, cracked with age. Opening it, they discovered entries written in a hurried, almost frantic hand. "They never sleep, they watch. I hear them whisper my name. The house, it's alive and it feeds on fear." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Jack, we should leave." "Come on, Em, it's probably just some old lunatic's diary." People like to scare others with stories like this. But as they climbed back upstairs, the house groaned and the lights flickered. Shadows seemed to stretch across the walls, forming shapes that weren't there before. By nightfall, Emily couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every mirror reflected fleeting figures behind her. Every shadow seemed to move independently of the flickering candlelight. She called out to Jack, but he was asleep, or pretending to be. Suddenly, the old grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight. The sound resonated through the walls, and a low, guttural growl emerged from somewhere deep inside the house. Emily froze. She could hear scratching, slow, deliberate, coming from the walls themselves. The diary's words echoed in her mind. "They never sleep, they watch." A voice whispered her name, almost lovingly, yet with malice. "Emily," she spun around, but no one was there. The next day, they tried to leave, but the car wouldn't start. Every time Jack tried the ignition, the engine died immediately, as if something refused to let them leave. Emily noticed shadows moving outside the windows, just beyond the tree line, always keeping pace with them. As night came again, Emily woke to Jack's absence. Panic set in. She called his name, but the only answer was the creaking of the house. Venturing out into the hallway, she saw him standing at the end of the corridor, staring blankly at the wall. "Jack," she whispered. He didn't respond. His eyes were glazed, distant. A cold, unseen force seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, pressing against her chest, making it hard to breathe. Then she saw it, an outline of a figure in the corner, taller than any human, slowly emerging from the shadows. By morning, Emily and Jack discovered hidden rooms behind the walls, passages sealed for decades. Inside, they found remnants of previous inhabitants, old clothes, personal belongings, and dozens of diaries like the one they found. Each contained the same warning: leave before they claim you. The house never sleeps. One diary contained a map of the house, marked with red circles and symbols. It showed rooms that didn't exist on the main floor plan, passages that seemed impossible, and a central chamber beneath the house labeled simply, the Heart. Emily and Jack knew instinctively that this was the source of the house's power. That night, Emily couldn't sleep. The whispers grew louder, now forming sentences she could understand. We hunger, we watch, you cannot leave. Guided by a mix of fear and curiosity, Emily descended into the hidden passages, following the map. Jack followed reluctantly, clutching a flashlight. The air grew colder as they went deeper, the walls closing in, the darkness almost solid. Finally, they reached the central chamber, a large, circular room with walls covered in ancient symbols that seemed to pulse. In the center, a shadowy mass swirled like smoke but moved with intent. It seemed alive, its tendrils reaching out as if to touch them. We never sleep, it hissed. Emily screamed. Jack tried to pull her back, but the mass surged toward them, and the symbols on the walls began to glow. Emily and Jack struggled to escape the swirling mass, but the room seemed alive, closing in around them. The shadows twisted into grotesque shapes, forming faces that screamed silently, reaching for them with clawed hands made of darkness. Emily's heart pounded so loudly she thought the entity could hear it. She grabbed Jack's hand, pulling him toward the exit, but the passage seemed to stretch endlessly, turning the walls into an impossible labyrinth. Every turn led them back to the pulsing central chamber. Panic surged through them as the whispers grew louder, chanting in a language neither of them understood, yet somehow comprehensible in its intent. You belong to us. The house never sleeps, we are eternal. The words penetrated their minds, filling them with visions of previous tenants, frozen in terror, their faces pressed against walls, eyes wide in eternal horror. Emily realized with a shock that the house didn't just trap people. It consumed their fear and their memories, feeding itself, growing stronger with each soul it claimed. Jack stumbled upon a crumbling staircase leading downward. Maybe it leads outside, he whispered, his voice trembling. Emily hesitated, but seeing no other option, she followed. The staircase descended into darkness so thick it swallowed their flashlights' beams. The air was frigid, and the smell of wet earth and decay was overwhelming. Every step echoed as if hundreds of invisible footsteps mirrored theirs. At the bottom, they entered a cavernous cellar filled with rusted cages and broken furniture. Symbols similar to the ones upstairs were etched into the floor, glowing faintly in a sickly green light. Emily noticed chains hanging from the ceiling, swinging gently as if moved by invisible hands. A sudden movement caught her eye, a shadow darting across the far wall, leaving behind an imprint that looked disturbingly like a human figure. We have to find the exit, Emily said, voice shaking. Jack nodded, but before they could move, a cold wind swept through the room, slamming the heavy iron doors shut. The whispers turned into laughter, low, mocking, and human-like but distorted. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting, closing in on them. Emily pressed her back against the wall, feeling the paint flake and peel beneath her fingers as if the house was alive. They found a narrow tunnel leading from the corner of the cellar. The floor was uneven and slick with moisture, forcing them to crawl in some places. The tunnel smelled of rot and something fouler, like decayed flesh. Every so often, they saw scratches on the walls, deep enough to leave blood behind, though no blood was visible. The scratches formed patterns, warnings in a language Emily couldn't decipher, but the meaning was clear: turn back. A sudden scream echoed through the tunnel, piercing and high-pitched, followed by silence so absolute it made their ears ring. Jack grabbed Emily, whispering, "Keep going. Don't stop. Don't look back." Emily's hands were raw from dragging herself along the stone, and her knees were bruised from crawling. The air grew colder with each step, and their breaths formed misty clouds that lingered, as if absorbed by the tunnel itself. Finally, they stumbled into another chamber, smaller but equally unsettling. In the center lay a mirror, antique and cracked, its surface rippling like water. Emily felt drawn to it. As she approached, the reflection didn't show her or Jack. It showed dozens of figures, shadowy and deformed, their mouths open in silent screams, eyes black voids, all reaching toward the glass as if trapped behind it. Emily recoiled, but a force pulled her closer. Jack shouted, grabbing her shoulder, breaking the spell, and together they backed away. From the darkness, a voice whispered directly into Emily's mind, cold and commanding. "Stay, become one of us. The house never sleeps." She shook her head violently, trying to resist. Jack grabbed a rusted pipe from the floor and swung it at the air. The shadow recoiled, letting out a sound like tearing cloth, but the presence remained, looming and patient, its whispers crawling inside their thoughts. They ran through another passage that led to a circular stone chamber, its ceiling high and domed. In the center, a pit opened into blackness. The pit seemed to breathe, drawing the shadows toward it. The walls were covered with handprints, as if everyone who had been trapped here had clawed at them in a desperate attempt to escape. Emily realized with horror that these were not just handprints. They were impressions left by souls consumed by the house, permanently etched into the stone. Jack peered over the edge of the pit, and Emily noticed faint glimmers deep within, like hundreds of tiny eyes reflecting light. Then she saw movement, a figure, distorted and indistinct, climbing slowly up the pit walls, reaching for them. Emily screamed and pulled Jack back, but the floor trembled, and the pit seemed to grow larger, swallowing the chamber in darkness. The whispers escalated to a roar, filling every corner of the house, vibrating through their bones. Emily felt her consciousness flickering, memories of her childhood and family intruding upon her with terrifying clarity, as if the house was probing her mind, extracting fear and regret, reshaping her very identity. Jack grabbed her hand, focusing on the touch to anchor both of them in reality. They had to escape before they lost themselves completely. A narrow passageway on the side of the chamber caught Emily's eye. It was partially hidden behind a collapsed wall. With effort, they forced their way through, stumbling into a corridor lined with doors. Every door was different, some made of polished oak, others warped and blackened. As they passed, whispers came from each room, murmuring secrets and sins they had never told anyone. Emily realized the house wasn't just haunted, it was sentient. It could see into their minds, reading their deepest fears and weaknesses, and it used them to lure its victims further inside. Jack found a door slightly ajar and pushed it open. Inside was a small room, almost a nursery, with faded wallpaper depicting pastoral scenes. Toys were scattered on the floor, though dust-covered and broken. A rocking chair moved gently back and forth as if someone or something had been there moments ago. Emily stepped closer and the chair stopped abruptly. From the corner of her eye, she saw a shadow of a child, standing silently, its head tilted unnaturally. The child's eyes were empty voids, and it whispered her name softly. Emily recoiled, and Jack pulled her out, slamming the door behind them. The corridor seemed endless, twisting in impossible ways. Doors led back to the same chambers, hallways folded upon themselves, and the floor tilted unnaturally. They were trapped in a labyrinth designed to break their minds. The whispers became voices they recognized, friends, family, loved ones, all calling them, pleading, mocking. Emily had to fight the urge to answer, to run toward the voices, knowing that doing so would mean certain death. Finally, they found a spiral staircase leading upward. Hope surged and they climbed, each step a battle against exhaustion and fear. The house groaned around them, walls bending, ceilings stretching, as if protesting their escape. At the top, they found a door marked with faint carvings, glowing faintly in the dark. Pushing it open, they stepped into a large parlor, the rain outside now visible through tall, grimy windows. For the first time in hours, the air felt slightly warmer, the oppressive weight of the house lifting. But their relief was short-lived. In the parlor, the shadows gathered, forming a massive figure, taller than any human, its arms stretched wide. The faces of the consumed reflected across its body. "You cannot leave," it intoned, voice resonating from every corner. Emily and Jack backed toward the windows, realizing the house had no intention of letting them go. Desperation gave way to determination. Jack smashed a window with a heavy chair, and Emily helped him climb out. The night air hit them sharply, cold but real, grounding them. They dropped to the wet grass below, scrambling away from the house. Behind them, the mansion loomed, windows glowing faintly with the shadows inside, and they could hear the whispers fading but never disappearing entirely. They didn't stop running until the house was out of sight, hidden by trees and mist. Emily and Jack collapsed in a clearing, shivering, soaked, and terrified. Neither spoke for several minutes, catching their breath and trying to process what had just happened. The house still existed, still waiting, and they knew with chilling certainty that it never truly slept. The fear, the shadows, the whispers, it was eternal, feeding on those who dared enter. And as they drove away at dawn, neither could shake the feeling that the house was watching them still, its presence lingering in their minds, following them like a dark memory that could never be erased. Even as Emily and Jack drove down the winding road, the oppressive feeling of the house clung to them. The forest seemed darker, shadows stretching unnaturally toward their car. Every passing tree whispered their names in soft, cruel tones. Emily glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see the mansion looming behind them, its windows glowing with the silhouettes of the consumed. But there was nothing, at least, nothing visible. For hours they tried to convince themselves they were safe, their minds grasping for normality. They checked their phones, tried to call friends and family, but the signal was gone, as if the house had erased all connection to the outside world. Emily felt her thoughts drift, memories of the house intruding into every corner of her mind. She remembered the shadows, the voices, the eyes in the pit, and a creeping realization that their ordeal was not over. Night fell again, and with it came a heavy, suffocating silence. They stopped at a roadside motel, hopping for refuge, but Emily noticed something unsettling. Shadows moved independently of the streetlights outside, and fleeting figures appeared in mirrors, vanishing when she blinked. She shook Jack awake. "Do you see that?" she whispered. Jack looked, frowning. "It's just your imagination," he said, though his voice trembled slightly. That night, Emily dreamed. In her dream, the house was alive, walls breathing, corridors twisting into infinite loops. Shadows whispered from every direction, calling her name. She wandered through halls filled with echoes of previous victims, their faces twisted in silent screams. At the center, the pulsing chamber, the heart waited for her. From it, a voice commanded, "Return, complete the cycle, join us forever." She woke screaming, Jack shaking her. They realized the house wasn't merely physical. It had tethered itself to them, its influence extending beyond its walls. They understood that confronting it directly was their only chance. They could not run. The house would follow, drawing strength from fear, from uncertainty, from their attempt to flee. With grim determination, they returned to the forest road where the mansion had appeared. It was almost as if the road itself led them there, despite hours of driving in every direction. And there it was, the house, unchanged yet somehow more menacing, windows dark, doors wide open, welcoming them back. The rain had stopped, but a thick mist clung to the ground, curling around their feet. They entered the house, hearts pounding, knowing there was no turning back. The air inside was thick with anticipation. Shadows writhed along the walls, whispering names, recounting fears, forming grotesque shapes. The heart awaited them at the center chamber. Its presence was overwhelming, a void filled with whispers and eyes, consuming light and hope alike. Emily remembered the diary, the map, the warnings etched in the stone. She realized that the only way to end it was to confront the heart itself, to face the essence of the house without fear. Jack nodded, and together they stepped into the pulsing chamber. The shadows surged, clawing at them, voices screaming, trying to overwhelm their minds. Emily focused, breathing steadily, shutting out every whisper. She spoke aloud. "We are not afraid. We will not belong to you." The heart recoiled, twisting violently, voices screaming in unison. The symbols on the walls flared, then shattered like glass. Light pierced the darkness, blinding and pure. Emily and Jack stood firm, holding hands, anchoring each other to reality. The shadows shrieked, dissipating like smoke in the wind, leaving only echoes of the past trapped in the walls. The chamber trembled, and a deafening roar shook the house. Walls cracked, ceilings buckled, and floorboards split under the strain. The house fought to survive, but its power was tied to fear, and fear had been stripped away. Emily and Jack, calm and resolute, became the anchor that broke its hold. As the final echo of the heart faded, the mansion crumbled silently from within, the oppressive darkness lifting. The hidden passages collapsed, the pit sealed, and the pools in light extinguished. They found themselves standing outside, morning sun breaking through the mist. The forest around them was serene, normal, the shadows gone. The road ahead was clear. Emily and Jack drove away, exhausted but alive. Though the experience had left scars, both physical and mental, they were free. The house, at least this manifestation of it, had ended. But somewhere in the corners of their minds, they knew the whispers might never fully vanish. The house had been powerful because it fed on fear, and though they had survived, they could never forget what had happened. They eventually returned to their lives, trying to move on. The mansion faded from maps and memories of others, leaving only Emily and Jack with the truth. Stories of the house circulated in obscure forms, half-remembered legends dismissed by most. Only they knew its reality. The house never sleeps, its hunger never truly ceases. And in the quiet moments when shadows lengthen and silence falls, they could feel it, watching, patient, waiting for the next curious souls to enter and test the limits of fear. Years later, when Emily and Jack recounted their story to a trusted friend, they were asked why they returned to the house after escaping. Emily's voice was steady, filled with the hard-earned resolve of survival. "We didn't return because we wanted to. We returned because the house followed us, and the only way to stop it was to face it together without fear. That is the only way to break its cycle." The friend nodded, understanding, though unease settled in his chest. And somewhere far away, hidden in forests or perhaps in forgotten neighborhoods, a mansion waits. Empty to the untrained eye, yet alive, listening, sensing fear, growing stronger with every heartbeat of those who dare to enter. It is patient. It never sleeps. And Emily and Jack, though free, carry its memory forever. The whispers, the shadows, the heart of the house that devours fear. They learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let it control you. And they survived knowing that some horrors are real, some houses are alive, and some darkness never truly ends. After their escape, Emily and Jack tried to rebuild their lives, but the shadow of the house lingered in subtle ways. Small things reminded them: a fleeting shadow in a hallway, a whisper carried on the wind, the sensation of being watched even in broad daylight. At first, they dismissed it as trauma, a residual fear from their ordeal, but deep down, they knew the house's reach extended beyond physical walls. Emily began researching the history of the mansion. She visited local archives, libraries, and old newspapers. She learned that the house had been built in the late 1800s by a reclusive family, the Blackwoods. Stories spoke of disappearances, unexplained deaths, and strange rituals performed in the dead of night. One entry detailed a child who vanished in the house's basement, never to be found. Another described a fire that destroyed part of the mansion, yet it seemed to reappear intact decades later, as though the house rebuilt itself, alive and aware. Jack found himself drawn to obscure online forums, where people recounted experiences in haunted or cursed locations. He noticed patterns, houses that consumed fear, trapped the minds of their occupants, and seemed almost sentient. Emily and Jack realized with chilling clarity that the Blackwood mansion was not unique. It was one of many places with similar traits, all feeding on human terror, all patient, eternal waiting. They also discovered diaries from previous tenants, some buried in the archives, others in online posts. Each diary echoed the same warnings: the house never sleeps, the shadows watch, and only facing fear without submission could break its hold. Emily noticed one recurring symbol in all the accounts, the same one they had seen etched into the walls of the heart chamber. It was a sigil of binding, meant to trap souls, to anchor the house's consciousness to the living world. At night, Emily and Jack would discuss strategies, theories, and the nature of the house. They wondered if confronting it once was enough, or if the house would attempt to pull them back through dreams, hallucinations, or whispers in everyday life. Emily became vigilant, noting patterns in shadows, subtle temperature drops, and even reflections in mirrors. They began to see that fear itself was a magnet for the house's influence, and only clarity and calm could repel it. Months passed, and although the house never physically returned to them, its presence remained psychological. They learned to recognize its influence, small manipulations meant to destabilize their minds, misplacing objects, glimpses of figures in mirrors, or the feeling of being followed on empty streets. Emily realized that many people who reported hauntings experienced these same manipulations, and that the house's reach was not tied to distance. It fed on memory, anticipation, and imagination. During this time, Jack discovered a pattern in the house's past victims. Most who had survived a short encounter without facing it directly returned to experience hallucinations, paranoia, or extreme anxiety. Only those who confronted it with resolve, without fear, seemed to survive with minimal psychological damage. This confirmed what Emily had felt instinctively in the heart chamber. Fear empowered the house, defiance weakened it. Emily also began to feel a strange empathy toward the lost souls trapped inside the house. Sometimes she would dream of the trapped, their shadows pleading, silently crying, desperate for freedom. She realized the house's hunger was not mindless. It thrived on emotional energy, fear, doubt, grief. And perhaps, she thought, there was a way to free those souls permanently. They devised a ritual based on the diary's clues. The act of confronting fear with clarity, anchoring themselves to reality, and acknowledging the lost souls trapped inside. It was risky, but they hoped that by strengthening their resolve, they could create a psychic barrier, severing the house's hold on them and breaking its cycle. They practiced meditation, visualization, and exposure to minor fears, building a mental strength that could withstand the house's influence. One evening, Emily awoke to a whisper in her room. Return, complete the cycle. She did not panic. Instead, she focused on the sensation, imagining the whisper as nothing more than wind, unworthy of power over her mind. The whisper faded. Jack, sensing the change, joined her, and together they strengthened their mental resolve. They realized that the house, though patient, could be resisted, its power contingent on the mind of its victims. Emily documented everything: historical records, personal experiences, psychological observations, creating a manual for anyone who might encounter such a house in the future. They wrote about the importance of confronting fear without surrender, the patterns of the house's behavior, and the ways to anchor oneself in reality when facing the supernatural. The manual became their shield, a testament to survival and understanding. They also began to map similar locations, noting abandoned mansions, buildings, and sites of inexplicable disappearances. The evidence pointed to a network of sentient spaces, each feeding on human emotion, each lying in wait. Emily and Jack realized they had not just survived a single haunted mansion. They had glimpsed a hidden aspect of the world, one where human fear powered entities beyond understanding, and the consequences of curiosity could be eternal. Despite this knowledge, life gradually regained a sense of normalcy. They moved to a different state, away from forests, shadows, and haunted architecture. Emily and Jack found work, built relationships, and cautiously explored joys they had once taken for granted. Yet in quiet moments, Emily would sense a shadow lingering just beyond vision, or Jack would feel the faint pressure of eyes upon him. These were reminders, not of the house itself, but of the lesson it had taught. Fear is powerful and vigilance is necessary. On anniversaries of their escape, they would revisit the memories, recounting their ordeal to each other. They would speak of the heart, the shadows, the pit, and the whispers, reaffirming their strength and sanity. And though the memories were terrifying, they were also empowering. They had faced something that defied comprehension, had survived, and had learned the subtle art of resisting fear, of anchoring reality against the supernatural. Emily sometimes wondered about the souls still trapped inside the house, those who had not survived or who had been drawn in later. She hoped that their manual, their understanding, might someday help another. The house, she knew, would continue waiting, patient, eternal, but for them, it was no longer omnipotent. Knowledge, courage, and clarity had given them an edge the house could not touch. Jack, pragmatic and grounded, reminded Emily often that the world held both mundane and extraordinary horrors. The mansion had shown them that fear could be weaponized, that places could possess consciousness, and that human emotion was a currency these entities craved. But he also reminded her of their triumph. They had faced the unimaginable and survived, gaining insight and resilience that few could claim. Even years later, as they lived quiet, normal lives, they remained alert. They taught friends and family subtle lessons about fear, intuition, and observation. They shared tips on recognizing patterns, understanding psychological manipulation, and maintaining resolve. The mansion had changed them, but it had not broken them. Their experience became a guide, a silent warning to others, and a testament to the power of facing darkness directly. And so life went on, with the house never fully forgotten. Shadows would sometimes flicker in Emily's peripheral vision. Whispers would occasionally echo faintly in the corners of Jack's mind, but they had learned not to submit. They had survived, and that survival was a lesson for anyone daring to enter the unknown. The mansion, patient and eternal, waited for new souls, but Emily and Jack knew that the true power over it lay not in fleeing, but in courage, clarity, and understanding. Years passed, and Emily and Jack settled into a life that seemed ordinary on the surface. They bought a small house on the outskirts of a quiet town, far from forests and abandoned mansions. The nights were peaceful, or at least they appeared so. But sometimes, when the wind shifted and shadows stretched unusually long across the walls, Emily would feel the faint echo of a whisper brushing her ear, soft, insistent, almost loving in tone but laced with menace. They continued their research, compiling every piece of information about haunted places, cursed objects, and sentient locations. Emily became meticulous, cataloging not only historical accounts but also psychological patterns, how fear could be manipulated, how perception could be distorted, and how memory could serve as a tether for supernatural influence. Jack, equally vigilant, practiced grounding techniques, teaching both himself and Emily to separate reality from intrusion, to fortify their minds against manipulation. Despite this, the memory of the mansion's heart lingered. Emily would occasionally dream of the chamber, not as a memory but as a living place, pulsing and breathing in rhythm with her own heartbeat. She would see shadows forming familiar faces, hear whispers calling names of people she had never known, and feel the sensation of being touched by unseen hands. These dreams were terrifying, yet strangely instructive, reinforcing lessons of courage and focus she had learned during their ordeal. One autumn evening, a friend visited, asking about old legends in the region. Emily shared part of their experience carefully, without revealing details that could cause undue panic. The friend listened, intrigued but skeptical. That night, however, Emily noticed a subtle change in the air, a coolness that didn't belong, shadows shifting slightly against the light, and the faintest murmur of a voice calling her name. She recognized the signature of the mansion's influence, not as power over her, but as an echo, a reminder that some horrors are never fully gone. Jack and Emily discussed it in the quiet hours, agreeing that awareness was their shield. The mansion had been patient and eternal, but it was not invincible. Its strength relied on fear, submission, and uncertainty. By acknowledging it without succumbing, they retained control. Emily realized that even in the absence of immediate danger, vigilance was a form of respect for the unknown, for the past, and for their own survival. Over the years, they occasionally returned to their notes and diaries, refining the strategies, updating histories, and tracking patterns. They understood that the mansion was part of a network, each house, building, or site feeding on emotion, growing stronger with each encounter. The knowledge they possessed became more than a record. It became a map for survival, a guide for anyone who might confront similar horrors. Yet the mansion's shadow never fully disappeared. On certain nights, when fog rolled in and the moon hung low, Emily and Jack would catch glimpses in mirrors of fleeting figures in the background, the same way the shadows had moved in the heart chamber. Sometimes, a whisper would travel on the wind, calling a name, testing their focus. They recognized it instantly, anchoring themselves in reality, refusing to allow fear to take hold. Their lives were filled with ordinary joys, friends, work, travel, but the extraordinary never fully released them. They had learned that true courage meant living with knowledge of darkness without letting it dominate. They had survived a sentient house, faced a heart that consumed fear, and emerged with understanding and resilience. One day, while walking in a distant park, Emily noticed a subtle flicker of shadow that moved against natural light, shifting too quickly to be human. She smiled faintly, gripping Jack's hand. "It's here," she whispered. "Not the house, but the lesson. Fear exists, but it doesn't control us." Jack nodded, feeling the echo of their past strength. They walked on, shadows behind them, but neither afraid. In quiet moments, Emily sometimes wrote letters, not to anyone in particular, but to those trapped in the mansion, the lost souls they could not save directly. She imagined them reading the words, finding solace or courage, understanding that their fear had been real but not eternal. Jack assisted, adding observations and strategies, creating a legacy of knowledge. They understood that while the mansion waited for new souls, not all who encountered darkness would fall. Resistance was possible, anchored in awareness, courage, and unity. The mansion, patient, eternal, waited in forests, abandoned streets, and forgotten roads. It never slept, but neither did the understanding that Emily and Jack carried. They had learned the truth. The world contains places and entities beyond comprehension, capable of feeding on human emotion. But the mind, when anchored, could resist. Courage was more powerful than fear, knowledge stronger than ignorance, and connection between themselves and the world stronger than isolation. And so life continued. Shadows flickered, whispers echoed faintly, and in the quiet hours, Emily and Jack would feel the lingering presence of the house, not as a threat, but as a reminder. A reminder that darkness exists, that fear is a tool, and that survival depends not on fleeing, but on facing what is terrifying with clarity and resolve. The mansion never slept, but they had learned to live with its shadow, to walk among it without surrender, and to emerge each day alive, aware, and unbroken.